Some nights, the world feels so cold, you wonder if hope can survive until morning. On a blizzard-blind midnight in Montana, Wade Harper, retired sheriff haunted by loss, heard a call for help and stepped out into the storm. What he found would haunt him forever: a wounded German shepherd, her puppy, and a circle of hungry wolves closing in through the snow. This isn't just a story about survival. It's about second chances, forgiveness, and the courage it takes to care, even when the world is against you. If you believe in the power of compassion, give this video a like. And if you want to join us for more true stories where hope fights back, hit subscribe and become part of our community. Stay with us, because what happened next will challenge everything you think you know about broken hearts and the families we find when we least expect it. It was after midnight. The wind screamed across the empty fields, rattling the window panes in Wade's log cabin. Most folks in Maple Creek hunkered down behind locked doors. Wade, though, had always been drawn to trouble. Maybe that's why, retired or not, he still kept his old sheriff's radio powered up on the kitchen counter. He'd been up late, sipping bad coffee, his eyes heavy, when the call came through. Garbled voices. Then something about shots fired near the North Woods, possible poachers. His back stiffened, heart thudding. This land had always attracted the worst kind of men during hard winters. He tugged on his battered parka, slung his flashlight, and stepped into the blizzard. The wind slapped him in the face, snow cutting sideways, blinding. His boots vanished with every step. But the old path down to the timberline was burned into muscle memory. He could have walked it blindfolded. Somewhere out there in the whiteout, someone was breaking the law. And Wade Harper, for all his regrets, still couldn't let that slide. He found tracks first, deep boot prints, then a spray of blood on the snow, wet against white like a warning sign. Something about the pattern sent a jolt through him. He'd seen too many crime scenes to mistake a hunter's careful work for this kind of chaos. He moved fast, shoulders hunched, scanning the storm with his maglite. That's when he heard it. A desperate, guttural growl, not far ahead. Not a wolf, not a coyote. It was sharper, defiant, almost human in its refusal to surrender. Wade ducked behind a fallen pine, heart hammering. He shined his light through the swirling snow and saw her for the first time. A German shepherd, maybe 4 or 5 years old, fur matted with ice and blood, stood braced over a smaller, whimpering form. A puppy, maybe 6 months old, injured and shivering. The adult's back leg was twisted in a crude wire snare, flesh torn, bone showing white beneath. Blood soaked the snow around her. Yet she stood her ground, hackles raised, teeth bared at a semicircle of shapes lurking in the storm. Wolves, eyes glowing, waiting for weakness. "Easy, girl," Wade called, low and steady, hand out. The dog flashed her teeth, ready to die for the pup at her side. Wade felt a flicker of something old and painful in his chest. He saw the poacher's tracks, saw the violence of the snare. But now, there was only this moment: man, dog, storm, and the gray tide of hunger at the edge of the trees. The wolves advanced, slinking closer. Wade cursed under his breath. He drew his old service pistol and fired into the air, the sound booming in the silence. The wolves scattered, but not far. They knew hunger better than fear. Wade dropped to one knee, crawling closer, voice soothing. The shepherd met his eyes. Something fierce and intelligent flickered there, refusing to yield. "Let me help," he whispered. And in that second, the dog stepped aside. Not far, but enough for him to see the snare. He worked fast, hands freezing, unspooling the wire with every trick he remembered from a lifetime spent patching wounds and breaking up fights. The shepherd trembled, head bowed, but she didn't bite. When the trap finally gave, the dog collapsed, sides heaving. The puppy whimpered, nosing at her flank. Wade scooped them both up, ignoring the pain in his shoulder, and turned for home. No easy task. The snow was deeper, wind howling louder, but he staggered on, clutching both bodies close. Halfway back, a distant crackle cut through the storm. His police radio, forgotten in his pocket, sputtered to life. All units, search in progress, missing child, last seen near the old creek. Repeat, lost child, urgent. The voice was thin, static-filled. Wade swore, torn between instincts. Every second mattered for the kid out there, but these two dogs, wounded, freezing, wouldn't last 10 more minutes in the cold. Behind him, the wolves had regrouped, their howls rising above the wind, hungry and relentless. Not tonight, Wade muttered, jaw set. He pressed onward, boots slipping, carrying the shepherd and her pup through drifts chest high. The cabin's yellow porch light glowed like a lighthouse through the storm. Each step was a gamble. One slip, and all three would vanish beneath the snow. He slammed the door behind him, fell to his knees, and laid the dogs on a blanket by the stove. The shepherd's breath came ragged, eyes wide with pain, but locked on his every move. The pup nosed her face, licking at frozen blood. Wade worked quickly, tearing open his first aid kit, hands shaking from cold and adrenaline. "Stay with me, girl," he muttered, patching the wound, stanching blood. The dog whimpered, but didn't fight. Wade's mind replayed old failures, names and faces he couldn't save. This time he swore he wouldn't let go. An hour passed before the shepherd finally slept, one leg mangled but alive. The puppy curled at her side. Wade slumped against the wall, eyes heavy, listening to the radio's endless static. Outside, the storm howled on. Somewhere in the darkness, a child was lost. A pack of wolves prowled, and Maple Creek's secrets waited beneath the snow. But for now, in the circle of the stove's warmth, man and dog had found each other. Three souls battered by the world, clinging to survival. And Wade Harper, haunted ex-cop, knew that come morning, the world outside would be waiting, with all its pain, all its judgments, and all its impossible choices. The morning after the storm, Maple Creek looked as if it had been scraped raw by the wind. Wade Harper hadn't slept. He sat at the kitchen table, the German shepherd stretched out on a pile of towels, her puppy pressed close to her ribs. The old stove crackled, fighting the chill. Wade's radio still crackled with static, the words "missing child" echoing in his head, tangled with the memory of the shepherd's haunted eyes. He was bandaging the shepherd's leg again, improvised splint, clean gauze, careful hands, when headlights flickered through the frosted window. Wade's pulse jumped. He stood, wary as a cornered animal, before realizing who it was, Lizzie Parker, his old deputy. She was all grit and sharp edges, bundled up in her county parka, eyes narrowed as she marched up the walk. She didn't wait for an invitation. "You answer your radio anymore, Wade?" she barked, stomping snow off her boots. "I had a dozen people worried sick. Thought you might have gotten yourself lost. Or worse." Wade shook his head, voice rough. "Wasn't lost. Had my hands full." He nodded toward the dogs. Lizzie's eyes softened when she saw them. "That's Ruby, right? Saw her running wild out by the Booker Ranch a few times." She crouched beside the shepherd, who watched with suspicion, tail thumping once, then falling still. "She's hurt bad." Wade nodded. "Snare trap, puppy too. Wolves almost got them both." He kept his hands busy, pretending not to see the concern on Lizzie's face. "We need to get her to the shelter," Lizzie said. "Doc Salinger can look at the leg. And there's a mob brewing in town, Wade. Booker's already raising hell. Says these dogs are the reason for half the missing calves this winter. Wade's jaw tightened. Booker's looking for someone to blame. Lizzie shrugged. Doesn't mean he won't get what he wants. Town's divided. Got kids and old folks rooting for the strays, but a lot of ranchers are on edge. You know how it goes. Wade glanced at Ruby, then at Max, the puppy, who had finally managed to eat a scrap of sausage after hours of coaxing. We'll go, he said, but I'm not letting Booker or anyone else decide what happens to them. Underscore, 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 underscore. The shelter was a squat concrete building on the edge of town, still bearing the scars of too many winters and too little money. A small crowd had gathered, shivering in the cold, watching Wade and Lizzie carry Ruby inside on a makeshift stretcher. The puppy trotted close behind, ears flat, tail tucked. Inside, the heat was barely enough to chase the frost from the windows. Doc Salinger, stooped and gentle, met them with a grim shake of the head. I'll do what I can, but the leg might be lost. Wade held Ruby's head, whispering softly while Salinger worked. Max refused to leave his mother's side, baring tiny teeth at anyone who tried. Tension simmered in the main office, spilling out into the street. Earl Booker, a mountain of a man in a sheepskin coat, cornered Wade as he stepped outside for air. You brought that killer into town, Harper? Booker's voice carried, and a few others gathered closer. Wade didn't back down. She's no killer. She's a victim, same as her pup. Earl spat in the snow. Victim, huh? Ask the Jensens about their heifer. Or the Nunez kid. Dog like that goes wild, no one's safe. He glared at Wade, then at Lizzie. If the law won't deal with her, maybe I will. Lizzie's hand hovered near her belt, eyes cool. Careful, Earl. This isn't your rodeo. The argument drew more onlookers. Some teens, faces Wade recognized from church or the diner, stood up for Ruby. She's just scared. You can't put her down, shouted Jenna Ross, fiery and stubborn, flanked by friends clutching homemade posters. A few parents pulled their kids away, whispering warnings about dangerous strays and soft-hearted fools. Inside, Doc Salinger made the call. I can save her, but the leg's got to go. Wade nodded, guilt clawing at him. He remembered another rescue. A girl in the river, years ago. He'd been too slow then, too cautious. She hadn't made it. He looked at Ruby and promised himself he wouldn't fail this time. News traveled fast. By dusk, local media crews had set up in the parking lot, interviewing anyone willing to talk. Rumors twisted the story. Some said Ruby was rabid. Others claimed Wade had attacked Booker with his gun. The town's Facebook page erupted in arguments, people picking sides before the facts were clear. As night fell, Lizzie found Wade staring through the shelter window, watching Ruby sleep beside her bandaged pup. You all right? She asked quietly. He shook his head. No, but I'm not quitting. His eyes were hard, haunted. Not again. Lizzie rested a hand on his shoulder. We'll get through this. But you know it's not just about the dogs, right? This town, it's about to tear itself apart. Wade nodded. In his gut, he felt it. The old lines redrawn, neighbors turning on each other, all over 2 wounded strays and a missing child still out there in the snow. And so, as the shelter lights flickered and shadows gathered, Wade Harper braced himself. For Ruby, for Max, for a town divided by fear and hope, anger and compassion. The real storm, he realized, was only just beginning. The shelter was supposed to be a safe haven, but by nightfall, it felt more like a powder keg. Snow battered the windows, wind howled under the doors, and every shadow seemed to twitch with rumor or threat. Wade Harper leaned on the cracked Formica counter, eyes gritty from lack of sleep, listening to the hiss of the storm. He tried not to think about the news crews still huddled outside, or the simmering arguments on the street. He tried not to think about Booker's threat echoing in his head. Ruby lay sedated in a back room, a bundle of blankets and bandages, her chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm. The anesthesia would wear off soon. Doc Salinger had done what he could. The leg was gone, amputated above the knee. The wound was raw but clean. Wade had helped with the surgery, hands steady, mind blank, just doing what had to be done. Still, seeing Ruby like that, her strength reduced, her body forever changed, gnawed at him. Max refused to be separated. The puppy had wedged himself in the narrow space between the kennel wall and Ruby's side, eyes glassy with fear, tail unmoving. He wouldn't eat, not even when Wade tried tempting him with warm chicken. He'd only lick at Ruby's face, whimper, and look up at Wade with something close to accusation. Wade knew that look. He'd worn it himself once. Lizzie appeared in the doorway, face pinched with exhaustion, hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. "You need a break," she said. "I can sit with them a while." Wade shook his head. "I'm fine." She studied him, arms crossed. "You know, there's a reason you're not sheriff anymore." He met her eyes, jaw tight. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you can't save everybody," Lizzie said quietly. "And if you keep trying to bleed for every lost cause, you're gonna run dry." He looked away, shame prickling. "I don't have a choice." She leaned against the doorframe. "Is this about Ruby or is it about Dylan?" The question landed like a punch. Wade's fists curled. For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, headlights swept across the snow, shouts, a crash, then the sound of glass shattering. Lizzie jerked upright, hand at her sidearm. "Stay here," she ordered, sprinting for the front. Wade hesitated, then followed. The main lobby was chaos. Someone had hurled a brick through the front window. Glass glittered on the floor like ice. On the wall, in dripping red spray paint, someone had scrawled, "Dogs die, people live." A cluster of kids, Jenna Ross and her friends, stood in the parking lot, eyes wide with fear and fury. On the other side, Booker's ranch hands jeered, stomping slush into the tile. Lizzie wedged herself between them, voice sharp as a whip. "Everyone out, now. If I see you on this property again tonight, I'll have you in a cell by sunrise." The crowd scattered, muttering. Wade locked the doors behind them, heart pounding. When he turned, Lizzie was scrubbing at the graffiti with an old rag, breath coming in short bursts. "They could have hurt the dogs," she said. "They could have set the place on fire." He nodded. "That's what they want. To scare us, to make us run." Lizzie slumped on a bench. "It's not just about the dogs, Wade. People are scared. They see everything getting worse, cattle lost, jobs drying up, kids disappearing. They want something to blame, something to hate." Wade sat beside her, the old ache in his chest flaring. "I get it, but hate won't fix anything." He closed his eyes, remembered Dylan, his son, lost to the river years ago. The guilt never really faded. Maybe it was why he couldn't walk away from Ruby and Max. Maybe, deep down, he hoped saving them would save a part of himself. A door creaked. Wade went back to Ruby's side. The anesthesia had worn off. She tried to stand, legs trembling, but fell back, panting. Max whined, pressed tighter. Wade knelt, stroking her head. "Easy, girl," he murmured. "I've got you." Ruby's eyes, clouded with pain, flicked between Wade and Max. She seemed to measure the room, weighing the threats. When the door banged from the wind, she jerked, barking hoarsely. Max bolted, slamming into the wall, scrabbling for an exit that wasn't there. Wade coaxed him back. He sat for hours on the cold floor, letting Max inch closer, then finally curl up in his lap. Wade felt the puppy's heartbeat, fast and frantic, through the flannel of his shirt. He whispered stories from another life, fishing trips, ball games, all the things he never got to finish with Dylan. Through the night, Lizzie cleaned, patched the window, called in reports. She checked on Wade every so often, her face softening when she saw him cradling Max, Ruby's head resting on his knee. "You're a stubborn old fool," she said once with the ghost of a smile. "Guess I am," Wade replied. By dawn, the shelter looked like a battleground. Glass swept into corners, graffiti barely faded, the air heavy with tension and exhaustion. But Ruby was alive. Max had eaten finally, and now slept with his nose tucked under her good paw. Wade stretched, back popping, and looked out the window at the town waking up, angry, frightened, divided, but alive. He knew the storm wasn't over. The real battle was only just beginning. But for now, he let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, some things were still worth saving. The shelter no longer felt safe after the night's vandalism. Wade Harper stayed until the afternoon, helping Lizzie patch up broken glass and reassure volunteers. But the tension was thick as ice in the air. News vans prowled outside, snapping pictures every time a door creaked open. People whispered in corners, some with sympathy, others with anger, suspicion, or something darker. Ruby, now minus her back leg, lay groggy on a thick quilt in the makeshift recovery room. Her puppy Max never left her side, even as volunteers swept glass from the kennels and the phones rang non-stop with calls from angry ranchers or anxious teenagers. Ruby startled at every new noise, barking hoarsely when someone in boots passed by the door. Each time Max pressed himself closer, ears flat, trembling. Wade saw the signs: trauma in the dogs, trauma in himself. He'd been here before after Dylan died. The world kept spinning, but for a while every sound was a threat and every shadow a memory. Now, seeing Ruby struggle, he felt a strange kinship. She'd lost a part of herself but refused to give up. He respected that. He needed that reminder. By late afternoon, Lizzie found him standing over Ruby's crate, lost in thought. "You can't stay here all night again," she said, voice gentle. "You need real rest. And so do they. It's not safe with Booker stirring folks up." Wade nodded reluctantly. "I'll take them to my place, at least until things calm down." Lizzie raised an eyebrow. "You sure you're up for that?" He almost said no. He almost admitted how empty the house had felt since Dylan's death, how the quiet had become unbearable, how every echo reminded him of all he'd lost. Instead, he just shrugged. "They'll be safer with me." With Doc Salinger's cautious blessing, Wade carried Ruby to his battered old truck, Max whimpering in his arms. The drive home was slow, cautious, the roads still slick and rutted from the blizzard. The sun hung low, gold and cold over the snowy fields as they crossed the bridge into his property. Wade felt a pulse of old anxiety. Was he doing the right thing, or just opening himself to more pain? The cabin greeted him with silence and the faintest smell of coffee grounds. He set up a makeshift bed near the fireplace, arranging blankets and pillows so Ruby could settle without jostling her bandaged stump. Max circled 3 times before curling at her side, keeping one wary eye on Wade. The shepherd watched everything, her gaze sharp even through exhaustion. It took half an hour before she relaxed enough to rest her chin on her paws, sighing as if letting out years of fear in a single breath. Wade moved through the motions of care, Water bowls, pain meds, checking the stitches. But when he finally sat down, the memories rushed in. The house was filled with old photos. Dylan with a fishing pole, his late wife's smile, a dog from another lifetime. Wade pulled out a battered journal and began to write. Not sure who I'm helping more, them or me. They look at me like I'm something I'm not. Like I still know how to save anything. The firelight flickered, casting shadows that danced with the ghosts of old regrets. Ruby whimpered in her sleep, legs twitching as if still running. Max startled awake at every pop from the stove, tail lashing, looking for threats. Wade let him climb into his lap, rough hands stroking the puppy's head until he settled. Later that night, Lizzie stopped by with a casserole in a foil tray, her way of saying she cared, even if she couldn't say it out loud. She sat on the steps, picking at her cuticles, watching Ruby doze and Max gnaw a corner of blanket. You know, she said quietly, I lost my brother to a drunk driver when I was 19. Never talked about it much. But I still have dreams where I see him at the end of the hall, waiting for me to fix it. Guess we all carry scars, one way or another. Wade nodded. I keep thinking I could have done something different, said something different. Maybe Dylan would still be here. Lizzie shrugged, eyes shining. We all think that, but sometimes all you can do is what you're doing now. Be there. Sit with the pain. Silence settled. The fire crackled. Max curled up, finally asleep, and Ruby pressed her nose to Wade's palm, accepting comfort at last. It was a small thing, a broken dog, letting a broken man in. But in that quiet, they made a kind of truce with the past, a pact to keep going. The blizzard raged outside, but in the little cabin, the wounds, dog and human, were exposed to the warmth, not the cold. Ruby shifted, tail thumping gently, and for the first time since the rescue, she closed her eyes without flinching. As Lizzie left, she squeezed Wade's arm. Don't shut us out, Wade. Not everyone wants to hurt you, or them. He managed to smile. I'll try. That night, as the wind moaned across the fields, Wade wrote again in his journal. Maybe healing doesn't mean forgetting. Maybe it just means letting someone sit beside you, scars and all. Ruby slept by his bed, Max snoring at her side. And Wade, for the first time in a long while, let himself believe that maybe tomorrow would be just a little less lonely. Morning brought little relief. Wade awoke to find Max sitting at the edge of the rug, ears perked toward the window, nose twitching at the unfamiliar world outside. Ruby lay beside the fireplace, panting softly, bandaged stump hidden beneath a blanket. The snow had stopped, but Maple Creek felt colder than ever, like something in the air had frozen harder than the drifts outside. Wade moved quietly, fixing coffee, scrambling eggs, his movements careful not to startle the dogs. Max followed him everywhere, always glancing back to check on Ruby. The routine helped, gave them all something to do besides worry. Still, every time the phone rang or a truck rumbled down the road, Wade's gut tightened. He knew the storm outside wasn't over, just changing shape. The town was restless. Rumors twisted through every conversation. Some said Ruby and Max were a menace. Others that Wade had become a hermit, hoarding strays and thumbing his nose at the law. Earl Booker, never one to let a grudge die quietly, stoked every fire he could. Harper's gone soft, he told anyone who'd listen. You let a crippled dog and her mutt run loose. Next thing you know, your kids'll be next. Some ranchers started coming around in pairs, trucks idling at the end of Wade's driveway. They never stepped onto the property, but their message was clear. We're watching you. At night, Wade sometimes glimpsed headlights across the field, lingering just out of sight. He kept his old service pistol close, not because he expected trouble, but because trouble always seemed to find him. Then one morning, Wade stepped outside and found his fence sagging, two posts sawn nearly through. A crudely painted sign dangled from the wire. "Go back to the wild or else." He checked the barn, then the sheds. Nothing stolen, but everything felt violated. When he knelt to inspect the damage, Max trotted up and barked, hackles raised, nose quivering at some scent Wade couldn't place. He called Lizzie, voice low and steady. "Someone's trying to scare us. Might be time to make this official." She arrived within the hour, face grim. "You sure you don't want to pack them up? Take them somewhere safe?" Wade shook his head. "If I run, they win. Besides, there's nowhere safer than home." He left out the part where he barely slept, listening for footsteps on gravel, haunted by memories of another night when someone he loved had needed him, and he'd been too late, but trouble kept coming. That night, after Wade locked up, he heard a crackling sound from the side yard. Max was on his feet in an instant, barking, then howling. Wade grabbed his flashlight and pistol and raced outside. Smoke drifted up from behind the woodshed. A fire, small but spreading fast, flames licking at old timber. For a second, panic seized him. Then training kicked in. He fought the flames with snow, boots slipping, hands blistering, cursing whoever had done this. When the last ember died, Wade slumped on the frozen ground, sweat freezing on his neck. Max circled him, whining, and Ruby limped outside, favoring her stump but ready to defend. Wade hugged them both, heart pounding. He knew the message was clear. Not everyone wanted them safe. Some people would do anything to get rid of what they didn't understand. Word spread fast. By midday, parents were calling each other, warning kids to stay away from Wade's house. The old, half-friendly rhythm of neighbors dropping by with eggs or pie disappeared. Even church folks, people Wade had known for decades, crossed the street rather than meet his eye. But the dogs had allies too. Jenna Ross, stubborn as a weed, organized her friends into a Justice for Ruby club. They made posters, brought treats and toys, and even staged a small sit-in outside the shelter, holding handmade signs, "Don't blame the victims, give them a chance." Wade watched from the window, surprised by the loyalty of kids he barely knew. For every parent who scolded, two more teens snuck by in the evening, whispering encouragement and slipping dog biscuits through the fence. One afternoon, Jenna showed up at Wade's door, cheeks flushed, notebook in hand. "We're starting a petition," she announced, chin high. "You're not alone, Mr. Harper. Ruby and Max deserve a real home." She handed him a stack of signatures, almost 100 names, scrawled in every kind of handwriting. Wade's throat tightened. He didn't know what to say. The world was still dangerous, but for a moment, the loneliness lifted. "Thank you, Jenna," he said softly. "You're braver than most adults I know." Jenna grinned. "We're not done yet." But the threats didn't stop. Late one night, Wade heard footsteps on the porch. A soft scrape, a whisper, a thud. He flicked on the light, pistol in hand, but whoever it was had already vanished. On the welcome mat, a dead rabbit lay sprawled, a crude warning painted in red. "Next time it's the dogs." Lizzie urged Wade to consider moving Ruby and Max somewhere safe, at least until things cooled down. But he couldn't bear the thought of sending them away. Not after all they'd survived. "If they're in danger," he said, "then so am I. We stay together." He doubled down on safety, installing new locks, keeping the dogs close. He barely slept, every creak and wind gust setting his nerves on edge. Yet for all the fear, a new determination grew, a sense of resolve that maybe, just maybe, Maple Creek could still change. If not for him, then for two dogs who'd already lost too much. The days blurred together, threats, repairs, brief moments of hope. The town's debate grew louder, meaner, but also more honest. Lines were drawn, but so were new connections. Kids, teens, and even a few adults rallying for justice, refusing to let old fears dictate the future. And in the midst of it all, Ruby found her way onto Wade's bed at night. Max curled at her side. For a few quiet hours, surrounded by the warmth of their small, battered pack, Wade almost believed they'd make it through. Almost. By the end of the week, Maple Creek had become a town on edge. The story of Ruby and Max, the battered German shepherd and her loyal pup, had split neighbors into bitter camps. Some called Wade Harper a hero. Others saw him as a troublemaker, bringing more risk to a community already buckling under winter's pressure. But the storm swirling in the streets couldn't touch the strange calm that settled over Wade's home. Ruby was learning to balance on 3 legs, moving slowly but with fierce determination. Max, no longer the skittish bundle of nerves, took it upon himself to be her shadow, alerting Wade to every creak and shadow outside. Despite everything, they were becoming a family. Still, every day brought new reminders of the outside world. Lizzie stopped by with updates, another angry call to the sheriff's office, a fresh argument on the town's Facebook page. Booker spotted prowling the outskirts with his ranch buddies. "They're planning something," she warned. "You need to be ready." Wade just nodded. "I've been ready for a fight most of my life, but this time I'm not backing down." The tension boiled over at the next town hall meeting. The whole town seemed to show up, crammed into the old gymnasium, steam rising from wet coats and hot tempers. Reporters jostled for position near the back, while teens from Jenna's Justice for Ruby group handed out flyers and collected signatures for their petition. Wade arrived early with Lizzie and the dogs. Ruby wore a red bandana Jenna had given her. She looked almost regal despite her limp. Max padded close, head high, his trust in Wade absolute. As they entered, a hush fell, eyes tracking them with curiosity, fear, and something like hope. The mayor called the meeting to order, trying to keep the peace, but Earl Booker wasted no time. He marched to the microphone, voice booming through the room. "We got a problem here, folks. Dangerous dogs, trespassing on our land, putting our livestock and our kids at risk. Are we really going to let one man's bleeding heart endanger all of us?" A rumble of agreement swept the rancher's side. But then Jenna, flanked by her friends, stepped up. "That's not true. Ruby and Max aren't the danger. Hate and ignorance are. We're supposed to be better than this. We're supposed to help the helpless, not punish them for surviving." A handful of teens clapped, and a few adults nodded. Shifting uneasily, Wade stepped forward, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. He cleared his throat, voice steady but raw. "I've made mistakes in my life. Big ones. I know what it's like to lose someone because people looked the other way, or were too afraid to act. I won't let that happen again. Not to these dogs. Not on my watch." Lizzie spoke next, backing Wade up with her badge and her own story. She talked about the vandalism, the threats, the fire. "We protect the weak. That's the law, and it's the right thing to do." The meeting turned into a shouting match. Some people demanded Ruby and Max be put down or sent away. Others wanted a vote to protect them. But for the first time, the lines weren't so clear. More people spoke up for the dogs than anyone expected. Parents whose kids had been comforted by Max, a Vietnam vet who saw himself in Ruby's scars, an elderly woman who said the dogs reminded her of better times. Then Earl tried to seize the moment. He stormed down the aisle, jaw clenched, intent on taking the dogs himself. "If the law won't protect us, I will," he roared, shoving Wade aside and lunging for Ruby's leash. The room erupted. Lizzie jumped between them, badge flashing, hand on her weapon. Teens shouted, adults crowded in. In the chaos, Earl grabbed at Ruby. She barked, backing into Wade, putting herself between him and danger. The moment crystallized. Ruby, the wounded stray, standing guard over the man who had risked everything for her. Someone pulled out a phone. The scuffle was caught on camera. Earl's aggression, Wade's restraint, Lizzie's calm authority, Ruby's courage. As the crowd parted, Lizzie stepped forward, cuffs in hand, and arrested Earl for assault and disturbing the peace. For a long moment, the room was silent, the air electric with shock and realization. Booker's cronies glared, but the tide was turning. Even the mayor, usually cautious, said, "Enough. We settle this by the book. The animals stay with Wade for now." The next day, the video went viral, across the county, then the state. Animal welfare groups reached out. Support poured in from unexpected corners. Letters and emails flooded the sheriff's office, some angry, but many grateful that someone had finally stood up for what was right. Wade finalized the adoption papers, making Ruby and Max his family for good. Lizzie stood beside him, Jenna beaming as she handed over the last signatures for the petition. There were still hard days ahead, and not everyone was convinced. But in that moment, hope bloomed. That night, as the house quieted and the world seemed a little less cruel, Wade sat with Ruby's head in his lap, Max pressed against his side. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future, not just surviving, but living. Together. The video from the town hall exploded online overnight, transforming Ruby and Max from small-town scapegoats into symbols of survival. It felt surreal to Wade. One minute he was just a battered ex-cop with 2 broken dogs. The next, his porch was littered with letters. Reporters called day and night, and strangers from across Montana were driving hours to leave care packages on his gate. But for every message of hope, there was another of hate. Earl Booker's arrest poured gasoline on an already burning fire. Some saw him as a villain. Others called him a victim, painting Wade and Lizzie as traitors to the town's way of life. The local paper filled with furious op-eds and desperate pleas for peace. Protesters from both sides picketed the sheriff's office, waving signs, some for justice, some demanding the dogs be put down. Lizzie called in extra deputies, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. "People are losing their damn minds," she muttered over a cup of coffee in Wade's kitchen. Phones ringing off the hook, TV trucks parked by the school. "I never thought Maple Creek would see a day like this. Feels like the whole country's watching," Wade said, stroking Ruby's head. She leaned into his touch, tail thumping weakly. Even Max seemed to sense the tension, sticking close to Wade's heels and flinching at every raised voice or sharp knock. Amid the chaos, the sheriff's office launched a formal investigation into the illegal traps found near the woods. Deputies combed the snow for evidence: broken wire, fresh blood, boot prints leading to forgotten hunting blinds. The deeper they looked, the more they found. The snares weren't just a one-off. Someone had been running an organized poaching operation for years, killing not just wildlife, but sometimes pets. And the evidence pointed to people high up in the local ranching circles. The town buzzed with rumors. One afternoon, Lizzie called Wade to the station. "You need to see this." She handed him a thick folder. Anonymous tip, photographs, lists of names. At the top was Earl Booker. Wade let out a low whistle. He's not just angry about the dogs. He's trying to cover his tracks. Lizzie nodded. "If we play this right, we can take down the whole ring." As the investigation unfolded, Ruby and Max became unlikely heroes. Animal rescue organizations from across the state asked to feature their story. Wade hesitated at first. He didn't want the attention, but Lizzie reminded him it could change more than just their own fate. "They're proof you can survive anything," she said. "People need hope, Wade." So Ruby, bandana bright and tail wagging, visited the local elementary school, limping up the steps to a standing ovation from the kids. Max trailed after her, shy at first, but soon nudging hands for pets and treats. Teachers explained Ruby's story, how she'd lost a leg but kept her spirit, how Wade took her in when everyone else turned away. One boy, thin and pale with a haunted look, asked quietly, "Do you think Ruby still remembers being scared?" Wade knelt beside him. "I think she does, but she remembers being loved too. That's what helps her get through the hard days." Word spread quickly. Soon, Max was enrolled in a therapy dog program, learning to comfort kids and veterans dealing with trauma. He struggled at first. Sudden noises sent him scrambling under chairs. But little by little, he grew braver, his confidence restored by Wade's patience and Ruby's steady presence. But the town's divisions didn't heal overnight. Protests continued, and threats still trickled in. Lizzie, facing criticism from both sides, stood her ground. "We have laws for a reason," she declared at a televised press conference. "And we have a duty to protect those who can't protect themselves." Wade was asked to speak as well. He hated public attention, but standing before the cameras, Ruby at his side, he spoke from the heart. "Second chances aren't just for dogs, they're for all of us. Maple Creek has to decide what kind of place it wants to be, a town that punishes the broken, or a community that helps them heal." The turning point came with the release of a damning report. The evidence against Booker and several of his allies was undeniable. Poaching, animal cruelty, destruction of property. The sheriff's office pressed charges, and Booker was denied bail. The news shifted public sentiment. People who'd once screamed for Ruby's head now saw the truth. Fear had blinded them to real danger, hiding in plain sight. Letters poured in from across Montana. Some were apologies. Others shared stories of wounded pets, lost loved ones, and the hope they found in Ruby's fight. The Justice for Ruby teens, led by Jenna, organized a celebration at the shelter. There were banners, speeches, and a big cake shaped like a German shepherd. Ruby, the unlikely guest of honor, wore her red bandana and limped through the crowd, letting everyone pet her. Wade stood back, hand resting on Max's head, heart swelling with pride and relief. Lizzie joined him, exhaustion giving way to a rare, genuine smile. "Think this town's finally learned something?" she asked. "Maybe," Wade said, "but healing takes time." She nodded, her eyes scanning the room full of children, old ranchers, and new friends. "Yeah, but sometimes all it takes is one good dog to show people the way." As the sun set over Maple Creek, the long war for Ruby and Max seemed, at last, to be turning. But Wade knew scars, on dogs, on people, on towns, didn't fade so easily. It would take more than a victory to heal what was broken. But for the first time, he truly believed it was possible. Maple Creek changed in small, almost imperceptible ways at first. The shelter, once a battered afterthought on the edge of town, became something new, a hub of hope, a place where scars met compassion. In the wake of the investigation and the poaching arrests, people looked at animals and each other with a little more understanding. For Wade Harper, life began to settle into a new rhythm, one that finally felt like something close to peace. Ruby was at the center of it all. Her recovery from surgery became a story the whole town followed. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Doc Salinger hosted hero dog therapy sessions in the old meeting room, local news crews trailing behind. Kids and adults alike crowded in to watch Ruby navigate ramps and balance beams, her three-legged stride awkward at first, then increasingly sure. She never once let her missing leg slow her down. If anything, it seemed to make her more determined. Max, once so skittish he'd flinch at the slam of a car door, began to thrive under the shelter's care and Wade's patient encouragement. Each morning, as Ruby worked with her physical therapist, Max played ambassador, sniffing hands, licking faces, nosing up to small children who were scared or sad. Volunteers joked that he was the unofficial greeter, his happy bark a signal that you were among friends. Wade's home filled with life in a way he'd thought was lost forever. Neighbors who'd avoided him in the weeks after the fire now stopped by to offer support, sometimes with casseroles or homemade bread, sometimes with awkward apologies and the hope of forgiveness. Even a few old rivals, men who'd stood by Booker and joined the angry protests, arrived with heads bowed and words that caught in their throats. "We were wrong, Wade. About you, about the dogs. This place is better with them around." Cards, flowers, and colorful drawings arrived from school children, taping messages to Wade's door. "Ruby is my hero," and "Thank you for saving Max." There was a warmth in these small gestures that made the cold ache in Wade's chest ease, if only a little. The shelter, still scarred from the break-in and vandalism, took on new purpose. The Justice for Ruby teens, led by Jenna, now brimming with confidence and determination, launched the Hero Dogs program, pairing rescued strays with veterans and trauma survivors. The idea grew from Ruby's story. If a wounded dog and a wounded man could help each other heal, maybe that could work for others too. Wade volunteered to help with training. He spent afternoons teaching new volunteers, guiding them through patience, gentleness, and the importance of earning trust. Ruby became the model for the program, a living example that broken things could be beautiful, that healing was possible, even if it left you changed. One afternoon, a battered pickup pulled up at the shelter, and an older man in fatigues stepped out, cane in hand. His name was Curtis, a Vietnam vet who'd never really come home from the war. He was paired with a wiry mutt named Duke, a rescue from the same poaching ring that had hurt Ruby. Wade watched as the two sized each other up, cautious, scarred, unsure. But when Curtis sat down and offered his hand, Duke inched closer and laid his head in the man's lap. The room went quiet, everyone holding their breath. Curtis looked up, tears shining in his eyes. "Guess we're both getting a second chance." That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Wade found himself sitting on the shelter's porch with Lizzie. She handed him a mug of tea, her smile softer than he'd seen in years. "You did good, Harper. This whole place feels different now." Wade sipped the tea, watching Ruby and Max tumble together in the yard. "I didn't do it alone. You stuck by me. Jenna, those kids, everyone who stood up, took a lot of second chances." Lizzie nudged his shoulder. "Ever think about starting over? I mean, really starting over, not just surviving?" Wade looked at her, then at the dogs, then back at the glowing windows of the shelter. He thought about the long months alone, about Dylan and old regrets. Then he smiled, slow, genuine, the kind of smile that feels like a door cracking open. Maybe it's time. As the months rolled on, the Hero Dogs program became a point of pride for Maple Creek. The shelter's vandalized walls were painted over with a mural, ruby and bright colors, running with Max, surrounded by kids and volunteers and veterans. Local businesses donated supplies. Volunteers poured in from neighboring towns. Even TV stations from Billings and Missoula came to do stories. turning Ruby into a minor celebrity. Wade's house was never empty anymore. He hosted barbecues in the backyard, sometimes just for the teens and their dogs, other times for anyone in town who wanted to be part of something hopeful. Lizzie came by more often, not just as a deputy, but as a friend, maybe something more, if either of them could find the courage to say it aloud. The pain and fear weren't gone. There were still scars, on Wade's heart, on Ruby's body, on the shelter's old walls, but something in Maple Creek had changed. People who'd once turned away now turned toward each other, carrying casseroles and forgiveness. The shelter, once a battleground, was a gathering place for healing. One evening, as twilight painted the sky, Wade stood in his backyard watching Ruby and Max chase fireflies. He breathed in the cool air, feeling the warmth of the porch light, the laughter from inside, and the steady thump of Ruby's tail against his boot. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. He looked up at the stars and whispered, "Thank you," to whoever was listening. Sometimes healing comes in small, persistent ways, in shared burdens, in broken dogs who learn to run again, in towns that choose hope over hate. For Wade Harper, the months after the showdown felt like living in a world turned inside out. The wounds, both visible and hidden, were still there, but now they were acknowledged, spoken aloud, no longer festering in darkness. Maple Creek was healing, not through forgetfulness, but through understanding, one slow, complicated day at a time. Wade kept a journal, pages filling up fast with his thoughts, regrets, and new hopes. On quiet mornings, with Ruby curled at his feet and Max sprawled across the porch, he wrote about everything they'd survived: the blizzard, the snare, the fire and the threats and the relentless judgment of neighbors, the desperate hope in Jenna's eyes, the fierce protectiveness in Lizzie's voice. The day the town hall erupted, and the moment he realized he wasn't just fighting for two dogs, he was fighting for the part of himself that still believed in second chances. He wrote about scars, how everyone carried them. Some, like Ruby's missing leg, were obvious, demanding attention. Others, like the emptiness he'd carried since losing Dylan, stayed hidden, twisting and aching in quiet moments. The town, too, was marked by its wounds, old grudges, new fears, the shadow of poaching and the bitterness of betrayal. And yet, healing was happening. Not all at once, not easily, but unmistakably real. Wade's journal became a place for honesty. He wrote of the nights he'd lain awake, afraid he'd made everything worse by taking Ruby and Max in. He wrote about the first time he saw Max play tug-of-war with Jenna, tail wagging wildly, the fear in his eyes replaced by pure joy. He wrote about Ruby's stubbornness, how she refused to let her missing leg keep her from guarding the yard or leading the parade of kids at the shelter. But more than anything, Wade wrote about forgiveness. Not the easy kind, but the kind that demands you look your failures in the face and choose to move forward anyway. He forgave himself, a little more each day, for not saving Dylan. He forgave the townsfolk who had thrown stones, literal and otherwise, when fear ruled their hearts. And most unexpectedly, he forgave Maple Creek itself for all its small-town cruelty, because he saw, day by day, that change was possible. One passage in his journal stood out, a truth he circled back to over and over. Real courage isn't just braving a storm or facing down a threat. It's sitting with the pain. It's trusting, even after you've been broken. It's choosing compassion when fear is easier. Ruby, in her quiet way, embodied that lesson every day. She was no longer just a victim of violence, but a symbol of resilience and hope. People who met her seemed to see themselves reflected in her stubborn will to live, her refusal to give up, even when life had been unfair. The town's transformation was slow but genuine. The Hero Dogs program flourished, with more veterans and trauma survivors being paired with shelter dogs each month. Curtis, the Vietnam vet, sometimes visited Wade's house with Duke. They'd sit on the porch, trading stories, letting the dogs doze in the grass. Wade noticed how Curtis laughed more now, how the war that haunted his dreams receded a little each time Duke rested his head in the man's lap. Jenna and her friends, who'd started with a few homemade posters, became local activists. They spoke at school assemblies and organized food drives for the shelter. Jenna, whose confidence had once been shaky, now stood tall and unafraid in front of the same adults who'd once ignored her. Even the old rivals came around. Some did so in small, awkward ways, leaving biscuits on the fence, stopping to ask about Max's progress. But each act chipped away at the town's old divisions. Forgiveness wasn't universal, but the tide had turned. Maple Creek was learning that real courage meant opening up, even to those you once called enemies. Through it all, Wade saw how the loyalty and love of two dogs changed hearts and minds. Ruby's unwavering protection of Max, even when she could barely stand, reminded people that strength comes in many forms. Max's transformation from a fearful pup to a gentle companion showed that kindness could heal even the deepest wounds. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of color over the hills, Wade sat on his porch with Lizzie, sipping sweet tea and listening to the distant laughter from the shelter's new play yard. He turned to her and said, "You ever think about how far we've come? Not just us, but the whole town." Lizzie nodded, eyes soft. "Sometimes I think we had to be broken before we could be put back together, right?" Wade smiled, watching Ruby limp across the yard, her head high, Max bounding beside her. Maybe that's what family is, just broken pieces that decide to stick together. He thought of all the outsiders Maple Creek had rejected over the years, strays, strangers, even their own. He realized now that the difference between isolation and community was often just one act of compassion, one risk to trust, one hand offered in forgiveness. As the stars came out, Wade closed his journal for the night. He knew the story wasn't over. Scars would remain, and new wounds would come. But he was ready. He had Ruby and Max. He had Lizzie and Jenna, and a town that had learned, slowly, stubbornly, to care. If there was a message in all of it, it was this: redemption is messy, and healing is slow, but both are possible when we refuse to give up on ourselves or each other. 6 months passed, and with each changing season, Maple Creek felt like a place reborn. What began as a story of violence and division became, through the perseverance of a broken man and 2 battered dogs, something else entirely. A living testament to the possibility of healing, forgiveness, and community. The town shelter no longer stood alone at the edge of town. Thanks to new grants and local donations, many from people who'd once feared or resented Ruby and Max, it had grown into a bustling rescue center. The outside walls were bright with a mural. Ruby, 3-legged and triumphant, leading a swirl of children and dogs beneath a sky full of stars. The Hero Dogs program thrived, pairing traumatized veterans and survivors with loyal animals in need of a home. And every visitor to the shelter heard the same phrase, painted in bold above the door: second chances for all. On the morning of the Maple Creek Annual Festival, the whole town gathered for the parade. It was crisp and clear, the sky sharp blue, laughter and music echoing between the old brick buildings. Wade Harper stood in the street, feeling the energy and expectation buzzing through the crowd. Lizzie was at his side, official in her deputy's hat, but smiling like a teenager. They exchanged a look, one that said, "We made it." Ruby was the star of the day, of course. She wore a new red bandana, kids' handprints painted on it in every color. She didn't run, but led the parade at a stately pace, her stride awkward yet proud, Max prancing right beside her, head held high. As they passed the reviewing stand, the mayor paused to wipe her eyes, and the school band broke into a lively tune. Children waved homemade banners. "We love Ruby! Max is our hero!" And veterans saluted, tears shining on weathered faces. At the festival's main stage, Wade found himself called up, hand in hand with Ruby, to accept an unexpected honor. The mayor cleared her throat, voice trembling only a little as she spoke. "Today we recognize not only the bravery of a remarkable dog and her pup, but the courage of a community that chose hope over fear, compassion over judgment. And none of it would have been possible without Wade Harper." A hush fell. Wade, never one for speeches, looked down at Ruby, then at Max, then back at the faces of friends and strangers, all of them changed by the journey they'd shared. He took a deep breath, voice thick with emotion. "We all carry scars," Wade said, scanning the crowd, letting the silence settle before he continued. "Some you see, some you don't. But it's what we do with our scars that makes a difference. When I found Ruby and Max, I thought I was saving them. But they saved me. They reminded me that no matter how broken we feel, we're never beyond help, never beyond hope." Applause rippled through the crowd, rising to cheers and whistles. Wade reached down, letting Ruby rest her head against his knee, Max leaning in close. For a moment, the whole world felt lighter. After the ceremony, people crowded around to take photos and share stories. Curtis, the Vietnam vet, shook Wade's hand and grinned. "If you ever want to open a shelter in Billings, you let me know. Folks over there need hope too." Jenna and the Justice for Ruby teens organized games and crafts, their laughter bright and unself-conscious. Lizzie brought Wade a lemonade and nudged him with her shoulder. "See what happens when you let people in." He smiled, savoring the warmth that had replaced so much old pain. "I never thought I'd find family again. But maybe family is just the folks who show up when it matters." As the sun dipped lower, Ruby and Max led the final lap around the park. The new hero dogs, rescued, trained, and proud, followed behind, each with a survivor or a soldier at their side. It was a strange, beautiful procession, one that no one in Maple Creek could have imagined a year before. Wade lingered near the shelter's entrance as the festival wound down, watching families load sleepy children and tired dogs into trucks and cars. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, the air humming with satisfaction and hope. Lizzie found him there, quiet and thoughtful. "You ever regret it?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "No. I regret what it cost sometimes. The fear, the fights. But not this. Not where we are now." She squeezed his hand, neither of them needing more words. Inside the shelter, the last of the hero dogs curled up for the night. Ruby found her favorite spot under the window, Max close beside her. Wade stood in the doorway, hand on the frame, watching them breathe, listening to the comforting quiet. The world outside was uncertain as ever, but inside there was peace. He left the shelter's door open as he walked out into the cool evening, Ruby and Max following. It wasn't just about them. It was about the town, the teens, the veterans, the rivals turned friends. It was about everyone who had learned that true community isn't forged in comfort, but in shared struggle, forgiveness, and the willingness to embrace what is broken. As he turned toward home, Wade heard laughter and the distant bark of a new rescue dog settling in. He smiled, heart full, knowing that this ending was really only a new beginning. He paused at the edge of the road, Ruby pressing close, Max sniffing the breeze. Overhead, The first stars winked through the dusk. Wade looked up, then down at his companions, and spoke softly. Words for anyone who might be listening, near or far. What would you risk or forgive for a second chance at family? And with that, he stepped forward, into hope, into tomorrow, into whatever came next, with Ruby and Max at his side, and the whole town of Maple Creek moving, finally, toward the light.